I'm Molly and I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in the first half of 2023. It's currently mid-July while I'm filming this, but I'm not going to be including the July books just to make this video factually correct. So I'll just be doing January to June. So I read 23 books in the first half of this year, which is a decent amount for me. Previously, I work full-time, but I was also studying full-time at uni, so I had a little bit more reading recreational time this year. I got through a bit more than I normally would, and also the kind of books I read are, fantasy, so it's pretty heavy chonkers, so I was pretty happy with 23. I find that if I read more than like 5 books a month, I sort of resent reading, because if I give it too much, I just feel burnt out. So I would say on average I read about 3 to 5 books a month, possibly 6 if they were either a bit shorter or I just had more time, but that's typically the amount I get through. So anyway, the first book I read in 2023 was A Time of Dread by Gwynne. He has a series of 4 books called The Faithful and the Fallen, the first one being Malice, and this is actually a sequel, part of a sequel trilogy to that series. So Faithful and the Fallen I loved. It's probably one of my favorites ever. It's just a really nice sort of traditional fantasy but with more modern themes and a more modern writing style. So I was quick to jump into the sequel trilogy because I finished The Faithful and the Fallen right at the end of last year. But I think that's where I went wrong. I think I should have had a bit more time between the two because, like I said, I get burnt out, and so know that I should have loved this and I really did like it, but I just think coming straight off the original series and then diving into this just didn't work for me. I loved the characters, I loved the setup. It's based 100 years after the first series, and we're sort of dealing with the consequences of what happened in the last series and like how the world has changed and who's ruling right now. There's a faction called the Marillier and they're angels, and they're currently ruling the banished land. So we're sort of learning about what's happened since we were last there. I really loved Riv, the main character. I really enjoyed, there's like a community called, it's been a while, it's a community of horse people who ride horses really well, and they're like horse warriors, and I really enjoyed them. But there was just 1 or 2 point of view characters that I kind of struggled with, Drem and Sig. It's not that I found it boring, but I was just more interested in what the other point of views were getting up to. But again, like, there's no reason why I shouldn't have loved this. I just dove into it too quickly. And so I did read the second one, which is called A Time of Blood by Gwynne, and I would say the second one I enjoyed more. And this was actually, I was reading this in around the time I got COVID for the first time, so which was this year, 2023. I made it that long because I live in Perth and we had really good restrictions. But anyway, second book was really good because our main character Riv had discovered some things that her family had been keeping from her, and we're sort of on a journey now and we're traveling around a bit, and so I felt a little bit more engaged and I enjoyed Drem's chapters this time more. But again, I think I just jumped into it too quickly, and that's my fault because this is one of my favorite authors, and so I think I just didn't give it the chance that it deserved. So I didn't actually end up getting to the third one because I just thought I just need something different, and I think I'll give these another go one day and do them the justice they deserve. But yeah, no, like I really liked them. On paper there was nothing wrong with them, I'm just silly. The third book that I read was Errand by Robin Hobb. So if you don't know who Robin Hobb is an author who has written 16 books in a world called the Realm of the Elderling. And so it's divided into a trilogy, a trilogy, a trilogy, a quartet, a trilogy. So last year I read the first 2 trilogies. Absolutely loved them. 10 out of 10, like 10s across the board. There's 3 trilogies that are about a character called Fitz. I really love them. So the first trilogy, I'll just give you a brief overview so that you kind of know a bit about these. It's about a character called Fitz, and it's just kind of following his life through the years, or at least 3 trilogies in this series follow his life. And so last year I read his trilogy when he was like a child and then a teenager, and it's very character focused, very deep, like very emotional, very heartfelt. They're all slow burns, they're all very slow books. If you're looking for a fast pace, Robin Hobb is not for you. But if you're like me and you're just really content to sit with the characters and kind of explore their inner worlds, then it's so good. But yeah, so I read the first trilogy and the second, which is, the second trilogy is not about Fitz, but it's based in the same world, but it's about a family of live ship traders who basically, they run ships that can talk and speak. But anyway, that's not what I read this year. I read the third trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings, which goes back to Fitz when he's 35 years old. So this book, basically I read the trilogy, but this book in particular was probably my favorite out of the three. It's pretty tight, it's a close call, but I would say my favorite because we're reintroduced to Fitz 15 years after that initial trilogy I read last year. We have about, I would say, 150 pages where we're really just learning what he's been experiencing through the years that we haven't seen him. He's reunited with a character called, actually that's a spoiler, he's reunited with a character who was one of his like treasured friends in the first book, and it's just that initial setup, like that slice of life, it was just so beautiful. And of course Fitz gets roped into the shenanigans that are occurring in this world. Again, it's just like the relationship he has with his companions, the kind of inner turmoil that he's always had that we get to experience. Like, this character feels like a real person just because so much time is put into explaining how he's become the person he is, and like having that trilogy to go back to and then coming to this, you can see how things that happened to him as a child have influenced the way he acts even in this book, and just like that continuation through the series and how she's built this character is just really good. So this is definitely, I would say, one of my favorite books of all time, period, full stop. So you're welcome, you should read that, but you should read the first trilogy first. But anyway, yeah, so I read that entire trilogy. The second one was called The Golden Fool, the third one was called Fool's Fate. These two were also really good. It's basically just a continuation of Fitz's story, and it's hard to talk about without spoiling. You can't really talk about this trilogy without spoiling the first trilogy, so I wish I could say more, but basically I would just say if you're someone who really enjoys character work and if you're an emotional person, you'll love them. It's also written, like, the style is a very like kind of whimsical writing style, like it just kind of floats you through the story. I would say a lot happens. Some people would argue a lot doesn't happen, but you are never not engaged. Like, the way she writes just kind of entraps you, and you just end up sentence after sentence after sentence, and you think, okay, I'm gonna stop now, but you can't, because she just like pulls you along for this ride. And so I really don't think you can go wrong by picking up this series and reading Realm of the Elderlings. The first one is called Assassin's Apprentice, if you do want to get started. So then the next book I read, because I needed a break from big series, so I'm kind of showing you this series as chunks, but what I do is I will read like a book in a series and then read a book in between, kind of keep it interesting, but just for the sake of being concise, I'm kind of lumping them together. So within that trilogy I read Circe. Now Circe has been on my TBR for a really long time, I just never got round to it.
Okay, I found this on the web for so what are you showing between for the sake of being concise and together so within natural necessity. Check it out.
She might have thought I was saying Siri, that was really creepy. She did! Anyway, so I read Circe. Circe is a Greek retelling of a character called Circe. She is the daughter of some Greek gods, and she is exiled to an island because she dabbles in witchcraft, and she's quite a powerful witch. That's why she's not like more of a god, she's more of a witch. But basically she's banished to an island for a few decades, for a while, and we're just sort of experiencing her life on this island and the visitors that come to the island and the things she has to deal with, and sort of just her whole life story. This really took me by surprise. I enjoyed it a lot. I know a lot of people have read Madeline Miller's other book, Song of Achilles, but I haven't read that one. I've only read Circe. It was a lot more romantic than I thought it was going to be. It was a lot more hopeful than I thought it was going to be. It was just a really beautiful, again, character study. I guess I like character studies of this woman's life and all the things she has been through. We also got, I'm gonna butcher this name, Odysseus. His story, because obviously in Greek retelling, Odysseus and Circe kind of intertwined, so we got like the inside scoop on that. It's just a really beautiful story, and it's, as much as awful stuff happens to her in this book, it's really at its core just a hopeful book about love and humanity. I really enjoyed the detail that went into learning about her witchcraft, her spell casting, and her relationships to certain gods. Like, for example, Athena, she has a rivalry with the god Athena, and it's quite clever how the two have a battle of wits. You know, it's just a clever little book, and it's just good. I haven't really read a bad book this year. Next was, I went back to Realm of the Elderlings basically, and this time it was the quartet. So after the first three trilogies, you then have a quartet. This quartet is obviously got dragons in it, and a lot of people say that this quartet, let me just lift them up. I'll give you a brief overview. I'll give you like a little sentence or two about each one, but basically a lot of people say this quartet is not quite to the standard of Robin Hobb's other work. Some ways I agree, some ways I disagree. I think the writing style is really good. If you know what to expect and you know that Robin Hobb is a slow burn, you can enjoy this quartet, and I did enjoy it. So basically in this world, dragons are not thriving. There's a fresh batch of dragons, and so dragon keepers are set on a quest to sort of protecting them, raising them, trying to like keep the dragon race going without getting into too much detail. because again, it's so hard to talk about a book that's like the 10th in a series. It doesn't get as deep into characters as her other trilogies do, but I found all the characters, like, I was happy to be along for the ride and happy to see where their journey was going to take them. A lot of the dragon keepers are young, well, not a lot, all of the dragon keepers are quite young. They're either teenagers or bordering children, like the youngest is 12. I'm so sorry, my mother just rang me. Anyway, so back to what I was saying. Oh yes, a lot of the characters are quite young, so there's a little bit of immaturity amongst the group, but to be fair, that's something different. Sometimes you have to experience being a teenager. There's a couple of love triangles. There's sort of like themes about marriage and partnership and men trying to dominate women. It took like a couple of turns, but disregarding that, there are other characters I really liked. Like, there's a woman named Elise who, she's texting me, my mother, I'm so sorry. Mum, leave me alone. Married to someone who doesn't quite appreciate her, and so she meets someone on this quest, because all the dragon keepers and other helpers are on a quest to take dragons somewhere. She goes on the quest and, you know, she meets someone and they have quite a nice dynamic, and I was interested to see where that was gonna go. The first one kind of starts off the journey. The second one is like, we're still on the journey. We haven't reached the place we're going to yet. Really, the first two kind of are one book, because it's sort of just the first arc of the story goes through these two. There's progression in the sense that the characters go through things, have emotional moments, and there are some trials and tribulations on the journey, but there's not a whole lot of change apart from just the maturation of a lot of the younger characters. The third one is we've reached the place we're going to, so we're there. There are still themes of relationships and men and women and how they treat one another and what is, you know, the right way to live and procreate. Like, it gets really into that kind of stuff, but we learn a lot about the lore of elderlings, which we really have been hearing about from the first, they're up here, that's why I'm pointing. The first few trilogies, like, elderlings have always been brought up, and so we're learning more about elderlings and who they really were and what dragons are and what life was like when elderlings were more present. And we also, in the second trilogy of the Realm of the Elderlings entire series, some of the characters crop up in this one, and so we get to see old characters again. And the third and fourth book were a little bit better than the first two, just because it felt like more was going on and we were tying up some nice loose ends. I feel like if you're reading Realm of the Elderlings, it's obviously worth reading, because you would miss a lot of information if you didn't read this quartet. It's not necessarily, I wouldn't say it's not the same as the rest of the series, because the writing style is the same, most of the themes are the same, the character work is the same, but I would just say this one doesn't quite hit as hard as the others. But definitely worth picking up. So in between that quartet, I read The Sword of Kaigen, which I read on ebook. Sword of Kaigen, so good. I kind of went into it blind and didn't know what it was about. I knew that it was written by a indie author, I think she was at the time. Came out a few years ago, it won a bunch of awards. Normally I'm a series girl and I stick to series, and while I take turns with books and series, I will still read series, but I kind of made a conscious effort to read a lot more standalones, and so Sword of Kaigen was kind of my way of reading a standalone that was still fantasy, because that is my genre. Sword of Kaigen is about a woman who is a repressed housewife and lives in a society where men are the protectors, and she lives in a society that's heavily based in like Japanese mythology and culture. So she is quite a submissive, docile wife, but what we don't know about her, and what I suppose her husband doesn't know about her, is previously she was an international student. She's actually a lot more than she appears. She's a lot stronger than she appears, and she's a lot tougher than she appears. And so while there is a lot of conflict and war in this story, at the core it's like about this woman having to suppress who she is and living by her society's standards, and how that's played out with her husband and her children and her relationship with them. At its core, it's a story about a family, but there is a lot going on. They live on this like secluded island where they have powers. I can't remember what the powers are. I'm not good at remembering stuff. They can do things that no one else can do, and so people are trying to come and take secrets. I can't remember. But basically, like, wars come to the island and we gotta, you know, there's a lot of conflict. There's like a lot of battle scenes. I would say it's fast paced, but it takes a little while to kick off. But that initial introduction to the world and to the characters is very much needed, and it really makes the emotional moments later on in the story really hit you and like impact you. And it's really good. So Again, if you're someone who loves characters, it is so worth picking up. I can't fault it, and I thought about it for a long time after I read it. It's also quite a military fantasy because the place where they live, like I said, the men are like the protectors, and there's a tiered warrior system and like a school for warriors, so it's very focused on strategy and war. But it's just a really unique story. I've never read anything quite like it, and just the character development within this world. There's a big theme of like there's more to everyone than meets the eye, no matter who you are, the wife, the husband, the children. Everyone has a lot more going on than you would think. And so the fact that she was even just able to fit so much into one book, it's unique, it's one of a kind, never seen before. Really good, amazing. So the next book I read was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Again, this was me trying to put more of a focus on standalones. Also, this year I've had a big focus on trying to read my physical TBR, and it's going really well. I've only read books from my TBR this year and have not purchased a book, so I'm doing really well. But The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is about a character called Addie LaRue who she made a deal with the devil to basically live forever. And so we follow her journey through hundreds of years. We kind of go between the present day and the past of, you know, how she figured out how her deal worked exactly and what the consequences were. And we also like are in present day where she's meeting a boy named Henry and sort of developing a relationship with him. The main premise of this book is that yes, she can live forever, but if someone turns their back on her for even a second, they forget who she is. So she can't really build relationships and get to know people because they forget her the instant they look away. Like if she goes to the bathroom, they've forgotten her. If she leaves the building, they've forgotten her. So it's quite sad, but it's also really good. And so the whole mystery in this book is, oh, Henry is the first person to ever remember her. So we kind of like deal with that situation. Quite nice because through her past, we get to meet several characters who she met through her very long life. And also we get her interactions with the devil. I don't know if he's a devil, but with the entity she made to deal with, because he keeps cropping up because he wants her to give up basically and like stop finding reasons to live, but she's just so good at it. Very different to the other stuff I've been reading this year in the sense that yes, I reckon you could say it is got fantasy elements, but it's much more contemporary than the rest of what I've been reading, especially the scenes in the present day. I would say historical fiction, you could almost call it, but contemporary probably wins out. It's a chonker, but it was good. I found that I enjoyed her like scenes in the past more than I did in the present, but that's just because we were in new places and it was interesting to discover like different points of history and different people she was meeting rather than obviously experiencing a world we already live in. There was mystery and it was just a nice palate cleanser for me. I think people who read contemporary fiction would like enjoy it, and I think people who read romance will enjoy it because it's sort of, romance isn't the only focus. Obviously like the mystery and stuff is going on, so if you read romance but you're wanting a little bit more going on, this is a really good book to read. So the next series that I picked up, which I took turns with through another series, but again I'll just, for the sake of this wrap up, I'll just give you them all at once, was Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier. This is the most underrated book I've ever read. I don't know how more people have not read this and are not talking about it because it was so good. It was beautifully written, really mythical, and like it's heavily influenced by Irish folklore and like by the Fae, but not to the point where it's like a fairy book, you know. It's not, and I mean this in a complimentary way for both books, but it's not like Sarah J Maas where it's like fairies and you know, we're romantic with fairies. It's not like that. It's more like the Fae and other folk tales from like Irish history act as the setting around a human family. So this family, they live in Seven Waters and they are like one with the forest, like daughter of the forest. It's like probably set to what people would say like the 1800s or like the 1700s, but I just know nothing about history, so I'm just taking a stab that it was a really long time ago. This book is about a girl named Circe whose father has taken a new wife, and she has 6 older brothers. She's the youngest of the family. She's number 7. It's an important number in this book. The wife is classic stepmother. She's not harboring any goodwill towards the children, and so what ends up happening is this new wife turns Circe's brothers all into swans. And so it's up to Circe to break the curse, get her brothers back, fix her family, and save the forest that her and her family lives in, because her father is the chieftain of this forest, the Seven Waters forest. It's definitely historical fiction, but obviously then it's got that fantasy element of like fae and other folk tales going on around her. But it is just so beautifully written. It's so engaging. It's very similar to Robin Hobb, in which the writing style sort of sweeps you along, and it's not like bang 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 things are happening. It's just more like you're being lovingly carried through this story. It's just so good. It's so mythical and beautiful, and there's a very lovely romance in this whole trilogy. So this series actually has like an original trilogy and a sequel trilogy, but in each book of this trilogy there's really detailed slow burn romances, which is the only romance that I enjoy. I don't like insta love, and I feel like a lot of fantasy books have romance, but typically I don't encounter books that put this much effort and love into their romances. And so as she's trying to solve this curse, she's taken places, she meets people. It's just so good. More people need to read this. Please read this. I'm begging you. I'm on my, I would say hands and knees, but I'm just sitting down. Please read this. The second book in the series is called Son of the Shadows, and it's about the next generation from the first book. I'm not going to give you spoilers about who it is or what their lineage is, but basically it's like probably 20 years later, and again really good. There's also another lovely romance. The heroine is slightly more assertive this time around, and so it's like the same world and the same magic as the first book, but it's still different enough that it's really good. While each is sort of their own story, it still has continuation throughout the novels of certain things they're dealing with and their relationship to their home and the forest and the fae and the world around them. Like, it's very quite nature based, and again just really good. In this book, the hero, so like we have the heroine and the hero, I wouldn't say it's definitely not enemies to lovers, but it's definitely, the romance wasn't as cozy this time around, but yeah, also really good. And then so the third one, Child of the Prophecy, I could argue reasons why each one is my favorite. I would say this edges the other two out, but that's literally just a preference thing. Like they were, for me personally, they were all 5-star reads. This one is, again, it's the next generation, and so probably about another 15 years later we have the next heroine, and this really nicely wraps up issues we were dealing with for all 3 books with the old ones and the fae and like all that mythology. Like, it has a really nice ending. But also the heroine in this one is very different to the previous 2 because she's a lot less sure of herself, doesn't know her place in the world, doesn't have the family love that the other 2 heroines had. She's a bit more of a misfit, and she also, due to her lineage, has to deal with being the outsider. She experiences a war between good and evil and tries to find out who she is, and the romance in this is very sweet, very lovely. Childhood friends to lovers. Again, like, the romance isn't the main focal point, but they are just so well written that they are the heart of the story, and so is family. Family is the heart of this trilogy. Love conquers all is part of this trilogy. Like, they very much give fairy tale, you know, they give childhood stories retold in like adult fiction. Just such a beautiful trilogy. More people need to read it. Let me lift them up one more time. Please read this trilogy. It's so good. As I was reading those, I was also reading 2 other series. So the first, The Emperor's Blade by Brian Staveley and The Providence of Fire by Brian Staveley. I only read the first 2. Again, I feel like this is a case of I just didn't read it at the right time, because there's no reason I shouldn't love it, but I just wasn't feeling as engaged as I could have been, because I think as I was cycling through series, I was reading this series, the Seven Waters series, and Red Rising series at the same time. This just happened to be not the worst of the 3, but the other 2 series are just so good that I just was struggling to be interested because I just wanted to get to other stuff. But basically this story is about an emperor who has passed away, and his 3 children live in different areas of the world. There's a conspiracy plot about possibly wanting to end the emperor's lineage, and so the children all face different threats, and they've all grown up very separately in very different situations, and so we're kind of learning about each child, except they're like adults now, and we're learning about the world, and it has a really good, like, it's a fun world setup. Like, one of the children is a warrior who flies kestrel, which are like these huge birds, and so he's been raised to be a warrior. One of the children, the girl, who was personally my favorite point of view, and she didn't get enough book time in this book, but she got a lot more in this one, which was good. She was raised by her father in the empire and is very political, knows a lot of the ins and outs of how their empire runs, and is overlooked because she's a woman. The third child, who is actually the next in line, so I don't know if he's the oldest. The daughter's definitely older than the boys, but I don't know how the boys work, because lineage isn't decided by age, it's decided by eyes, because the emperor and this particular son have like special eyes, which means they have special powers. The daughter also has the eyes, but just she's a woman, so she can't possibly run the empire. But he's been raised by monks, and so all the children are very different, and they have a really unconventional relationship because they have been raised apart. And so as they reunite in different areas, there's a lot of miscommunication, and a lot of issues between them arise because they just don't know one another and don't know how to communicate. But obviously there is, the threats to them are very real, and they're sort of dealing with that. And it is a good series and it's quite engaging, but I just think that both the son's point of view, there are times where they just got a little bit stale. And in the second book we actually experienced, so the warrior son has a friend, a female friend who's also a warrior, and we have some of her point of view in here. And so like I personally just found Adair, the daughter's point of view, and that other girl's point of view way more interesting than I did the boys. That was pretty good. It's pretty decent. It's worth giving a try. I think if you go into it with the right mindset, you'll enjoy it. But anyway, so the series that I have been reading apart from that, so this is the last sort of thing I got through in June, but I did start it in like May. I did a couple in each month. It's the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. This is so good. It is so good. It's crazy because like I would say this and this were easily my favorite series so far that I've read this year, and probably of all time ever, but they are complete opposites. Like while this is very mythical and like wonderful and slow and beautiful, this is extremely breakneck, fast paced. The chapters are so short. Some chapters are like 3 pages long, but that's because they're punchy. This book just punches you in the face over and over again. It's freaking fast, and that continues, like that pace, at least in the first trilogy. So it was written as a trilogy, and now we have like a sequel series going on. The first trilogy, it is snappy as heck, like it's so crazy. But basically this world is about a man named Darrow who is a red, and in this society reds are like the bottom of the totem pole and golds are on top, and we have an array of colors in between. And so the reds are very repressed. They're sort of the secret backbone of society that no one really knows about because they're very mistreated. This book is very dystopian, but it's also like a space opera. So we are on Mars, and the reds think they are excavating Mars to make it habitable for the other colors, but there's a secret that it's already been habitable for hundreds of years, and the reds are just mining to make the other colors just have a nice life, and these guys are breaking their backs down below. Basically the reds are like the gold slaves. Like there's a bunch of other colors, all the colors are enlisted to the golds in some way. Reds are like the manual labor slaves. Crazy. The first, I don't want to be that person who says the first book is very Hunger Gamesy, but it is in the sense that Darrow, he gets enlisted by the reform secret group that's trying to get equality for the rest of the colors, and he gets turned, I don't think this is a spoiler because it's literally like in the first 50 pages, and then we have all the books, but he gets turned into a gold and is there to sort of infiltrate the society and give the reds a fighting chance in conquering their overlords, the gold. He has to basically live as a gold. It gets put through gold education and like an academy. Their graduation is like a big arena battle between different factions in the school, and so that's what I mean when I say Hunger Gamesy, but there's so much more to it. And while like the plot's obviously the main focus, it's so quick, it's so fast paced, the characters also are so good. I don't know in how such little time he makes the characters so lovable, but again, a common theme in all the books that I love is the characters, and authors who take time to develop their characters and really put an effort into character relationships. And so all the side characters in this are so detailed and incredible, while also having such a dense, fast-paced plot. Like I don't know how he has done this, it's crazy. So this book sort of leads us into the other two of that initial trilogy, Golden Sun and Morningstar. Again, extremely fast-paced. Darrow's moved on from the academy and infiltrating more of the society. This is where it gets a bit more spacey, a bit more science fiction-y, in the sense that like now we're bouncing around between planets, and it just like with every book it gets more and more grand scale. And so the first trilogy is all from Darrow's point of view. It's just insane, like the plot twists. Every few pages something freaking crazy happens, and then you're just like, there's a whole new set of rules every page you're turning. The game's changing, we're dealing with a lot of craziness, and again the characters are just so good. The world is very detailed, and like I know you hear, oh, there are different like colors and in society like green, blue, blah blah blah. It sounds a bit gimmicky, but it's really actually well thought out, and it's just detailed, and it's just a lot of fun. Like if I could summarize these books in one word, like it would be fun. The next would be tragic and heartbreaking and despair, but the first one is fun. This is a wild ride. And so the next two in the series is where like there's sort of a time jump, I would say about, I think it's only 10 years, but this is where this series gets even more grand scale. We're dealing with more planets, more societies come into the fray, and we get multiple point of views in these ones. And so it's nice because it fleshes out the rest of the planets and world and kind of gives us different perspective on Darrow just based on other people's perception of him. Brothers and sisters, this series is crazy. It is so good. I'm not doing it justice. I think I'll do it in my own review for Red Rising just to give you a bit more about what's going on, but like insanity. It is crazy. The next book actually comes out 3 days from the time that I'm filming this video, and I am, even though I'm on a book buying ban, I will be purchasing that book and I will be reading it the day it comes out. But anyway, I digress. It is just crazy. Like if you love action, read this series. The action is insane. The battles are insane. The one-on-one duels are insane. The characters are thousands of them. There's so many characters, and they all have such a distinct personality and a distinct kind of flavor to them. Just madness. So anyway, those are all the books I've read so far in January to June of 2023. If I had to pick a favorite, I couldn't, so don't ask me to. But if I had to pick, I would pick 3 favorites, because I think I'm just one woman, I'm just one gal, and that's what I can handle for you. I would say probably Dark Age from the Red Rising series, so that was the 5th book in the series, was one of my favorites. My other favorite was Child of the Prophecy by Juliet Marillier, and then my other favorite was Fool's Errand, where we like revisit Fitz 15 years later after his thing. So those are my 3 favorites. All very different. I give them all 5,000 stars out of 5,000 stars. It's been a great reading year so far. Like this first 6 months, I pretty much loved everything I read, even the slower things, even the things I didn't enjoy as much. I knew that that was just based on the time I was reading them and not reflecting the quality of the books at all. It was a me thing. I'm doing really well reading my physical TBR. There's still a lot of my physical TBR that I haven't read, but like just I'm making a solid dent in it, and I'm really proud of myself. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.